you have 2 daughters, you have many granddaughters. If one of them was raped, and I accept it's a very unlikely thing to happen, but if they were, would you honestly look at them in the eye and say they had to have that child if they were impregnated?
Now, if it's an honest rape, that individual should go immediately to the emergency room. I would give them a shot of estrogen. Or give them...
you would allow them to abort the baby?
Yeah, well, it is absolutely in limbo, because an hour after intercourse or a day afterwards, there is no legal or medical problem. If you talk about somebody coming in and they say, well, I was raped and I'm 7 months pregnant and I don't want to have anything to do with it, it's a little bit different story. But somebody arriving in an emergency room say, I have just been raped, and there's no chemical, there's no medical, and there's no legal evidence of a pregnancy.
So life doesn't begin at conception?
Life does begin at conception, but...
then you'd be taking a life.
Well, you don't know if you're taking a life either, because this is an area that is... But to decide everything about abortion and respect for life on this one very, very theoretical condition where there may have been a life or not a life.
No, but here's the thing. Although it is a hypothetical, it does happen. People do get raped and they do get impregnated, and sometimes they're so ashamed by what's happened that weeks go by before they may even discover they're pregnant. And they have to face this dilemma, and they're going to have a president who has a very, very strong view about this.
Now, this is like the proposal that the people who like abortion endorse abortion because it's the woman's right to her body. You say, well, does that mean 1 minute before birth you can kill the baby? And I did this on one of the TV programs where some women were opposed to what I was saying. I said, this non-time baby, it's in the woman, she has the right, she argues with her case. I said, you would abort this baby because the woman has had some unfortunate circumstances, so the doctor gets paid a handsome fee to kill this 9-pound baby. Oh, that's not what we're talking about. But that is what they're talking about. They're talking about a human life. So a person immediately after rape, yes, it's a tough one, and I won't satisfy everybody there.
Another question from the audience?
Yeah, Kit Daniels, Infowars.com. Dr. Paul, if you could debate Bernie Sanders, what would you say to him? And what would you say to the supporters who think that socialism works?
What would I say to Bernie?
To Bernie and his supporters.
His supporters. You know, the closest thing I came... Bernie and I got along pretty well, and we talked a lot, knew exactly where we stood, and respected each other's views. And I think Bernie might have voted to audit the Fed, if I'm not mistaken. So give him the benefit of the doubt. But the closest I came to a real debate with somebody like Bernie Sanders was with Barney Frank up at the University of Pennsylvania. And the point that I try to make is, you know, you do well as a principled progressive. And I can do this with Dennis Kucinich, whom I know very well, and say, well, you know, you don't want to use force in the military. You want to protect civil liberties, and you don't like all this war. And sometimes Dennis and I would be the only two voting against some war position. But I said, why, and I'll propose this to Barney too, is why is it that you won't apply that same principle to, you know, that you apply to social engagement, you know, in social and sexual matters? Hands off, as long as it's voluntary, and nobody, the government just should be out of it. They should be out of marriage and everything else. And they agree with that. I said, why don't you apply that to economics? And they come up and they say, they understand the consistency. They say, well, it's different because freedom in markets allow people to become too rich, you know, and then they run it and they own everything, and they will not listen to the argument that there's a difference between somebody getting bailed out by the Federal Reserve and they're on the specialist versus somebody who produces a good product and we vote them their money and they haven't cheated or stolen or given us bad products and they make a lot of money. Why? I think it's sort of an envy and resentment. But I talked to them, but I have to tell you that so far I haven't converted many diehard progressives, because some progressives, if you watch it on the internet, we'll have really close agreements, and they might, be talking about the same issue. But boy, they don't want to even introduce the notion that the libertarians are with them on this, because they're terrified that we might encroach on their power to redistribute wealth. So it's a tough argument, but that's because they have a stronger belief. Others are sort of in the middle, and they can be influenced, and they can be converted.
Elizabeth Warren, running for Senate in Massachusetts, got some attention with this quote, and I'd just like to read it to you, and you tell me why she's wrong. She says, "There's nobody in this country who got rich on their own. Nobody," she says. "You built a factory out there, good for you, but I want to be clear, you moved your goods to market on roads the rest of us paid for. You hired workers, the rest of us paid to educate. You were safe in your factory because of police forces and fire departments that the rest of us paid for. You don't have to worry that marauding bands would come and seize everything at your factory. Now look, you built the factory, turned it into something terrific. God bless. Keep a hunk of it. But part of the underlying social contract," she says, "is you take a hunk of that and pay forward for the next kid who comes along." Why is she wrong?
Because she's a socialist. She wants the government to do all this. But the whole
Educate children is socialism?
Well, in a way, when the state runs things, that is a socialist idea, that it should be collective. I preach homeschooling and private schooling and competition in schools. But what she forgets, she's right. By the use of force, the government comes with a gun, they take money from you, and they build a highway that incidentally you can use because you don't have any other choices. But the money had to come from productive effort. She's saying it's the government. Who's the government? The government created nothing. The government, only they can do is steal and rob people with a gun and forcibly transfer wealth from one person to another. You take the building of our railroads in our early history. They were all subsidized, and most of them went bankrupt except for one person, Hill, who built the Northwestern Railroad out to Seattle. He didn't get one penny from the government. He was one of the very, very few, if not the only one, of the new railroads that didn't get any money from the government and didn't go bankrupt. So I would say the opposite is true. Yes, there are successes, and we are forced to use some of the government programs, but it's inefficient. It costs more money, and it was done by transferring wealth, not by creating wealth. Governments are always destructive in the production of wealth. They pretend that they're going to take care of us, like, well, the government's going to give us all a house. Look at what happened to the house. The big guys all got bailed out who ripped us off, and with all the derivatives and the banks, they're still being protected. Middle class lost it, and they lost their houses. So her whole argument is absolutely wrong.
So in Ron Paul's ideal America, there'd be no public highways, no public education, there'd be no public air traffic control system. There'd be no public protections for workers in coal mines, et cetera.
Well, that's an overstatement, because it might be a lot better, because a lot of those functions can be picked up. I think France has a private air traffic controllers. I mean, it's not like it's strange. The thing of it is, do you want government's inefficiency to do these programs, or do you want another source to do it? So that's a big difference. So I think it's how you want to bring it about. And I think private sources, you take roads. There's nothing in our Constitution that says Texas can't build roads. But Eisenhower, when he built the interstate highway system, he knew that he was on the edge of violating the Constitution. He says, well, we'll justify it because it's necessary for national defense purposes. So there was a respect for this at one time. But now everything, federal government can do everything at all. But there's no prohibitions against government schools. But there is no authority for the federal government to have a Department of Education and mess up our educational system. All they did was give us debt. Here we are graduating kids that don't know where they're going to get a job. They owe $1 trillion. Their education is poorer than ever, and the costs have skyrocketed. It's a total failure. See, we are witnessing now the failure of 50, 60 years of economic planning. The Keynesian model is a complete flop. And that is why we're getting a lot more attention, because our approach is completely different, and their failure is staring them in the face, and they have a long way to go to clean up the mess they've created.
Free market guy, and I think a lot of folks respect you for that, but do you not believe that some of these big insurance companies have gotten too powerful in what they can do?
Well, yes, this is a consequence of government-managed cares. The corporations get involved, the managed health care gets involved, the insurance companies get involved, the drug companies. Who do you think pushed through prescription drug programs? It was the drug companies. So I agree, the corporations are out of control, but it's not because it's a market function. There's been no market function. There's been a government-mandated function of a government controls this. So right now, do you think this administration is going to take on the drug companies and insurance companies? That's not going to happen. We have a type of corporatism that runs in this world and in this country, and it moves toward a fascist system because government and big business get in bed together, and it's not free markets at all. The free market that I know about existed a long time ago, and things weren't nearly as bad as they are today. Let me tell you.
That's interesting because it's a double whammy that you're proposing. You're saying, look, the corporations are screwed up because they've gotten too greedy, and the people who've helped them get screwed up is the government, who have really been their allies in this. That's
absolutely right, and they still are. They still are, and they will be in the outcome of this debate.
Go ahead, Debbie.
Thanks.
You're suggesting that
you don't think the corporations work the system?
You're going to say the government.
You don't think they work the system?
Excuse me. You're suggesting that the government tells insurance companies that they have to deny people based on a pre-existing condition, that they have to drop people from insurance coverage because when they get sick, that they have to cap damage it, that they have to cap people's insurance coverage annually and for their entire lives. The government doesn't tell insurance companies.
We didn't have that.
That is corporate greed. That is driven by corporate greed and corporate greed alone. And we need to make sure that we strike a balance. That's what this health care reform bill is all about. It's about striking a balance because the insurance industry in America, when it comes to health care, has run amok. And we have to get a handle on it so we can establish some balance and some security and stability for the American people.
Yes. You know, when the dust settles, if the administration gets what they want, they're going to have 30 million more people, get insurance. The insurance companies love this. I mean, it'll be subsidized by the government. The government's going to have to subsidize this, and the corporations aren't going to be complaining. Yeah, they'll complain now, and they might take some rules and all, but they're going to be very happy when all these people have to pay, and the government's behind this. So
but wait a minute. But hold on, Congressman.
We're going to get our deficits under control.
Well, but hold on a minute. Congressman, the math does not support your argument. Never before in the history of the United States has more money been spent by one industry on one particular legislation to try and influence it. They have spent upwards of $400 million in lobbying fees and ads, etc., to make sure this reform is defeated. If that's the case, why in the world would they, quote, love it, as you say?
Well, they will, because they'll get something out of it. But if you're really wanting to get some competition, allow the insurance to be sold across state lines, do something with tort reform, because believe me, the number of tests, yeah, really, we'll see. The attorneys aren't going to allow that. The attorneys run this place up here.
We'll leave it at that.
That's not likely to happen.
We'll leave it at that because we're out of time. But I enjoyed the discussion, and I learned from both sides. Thanks. I appreciate it, Congresswoman from the Sunshine State. And Congressman Ron Paul, my thanks to you as well.